I like it though.
Hello, today we are going to do day 16, adding and subtracting rationals.
Oh, the one where most of the song it isn't heard?
At the top, you have the list of directions to add or subtract rationals. The first step, you have to make sure you factor the denominator. It's a little different than last class when you had to factor the numerator and denominator. It is the denominator. And then you will find the LCD. The LCD stands for the lowest common denominator. Step 2, you will state the values that make the expression undefined, and that's because you can't divide by 0. We also call these restricted values. Restricted values. The next step will be to multiply the numerator and denominator by any missing lowest common denominator factors. That's going to make more sense when we actually do a problem. And the denominators must be the same. This is really big. The denominators must be the same. You know this. You have to have a common denominator. This is a common denominator. When you take your quiz, you will have a question, and the question is, what do you have to have, or what operations require you to have a common denominator? And it's addition and subtraction. You have to have a common denominator to add or subtract fractions. When you add or subtract, the denominator will stay the same. So they are the same, and then that same denominator. And then the only thing that you do is combine like terms in the numerator. Last, you're going to factor the numerator if you can. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And then you'll factor out any, you'll mark out any common factors in the numerator and denominator. So divide out common factors, we're going to mark them out. For the first example, the lowest common denominator here, we'd have to multiply these together. We'd have to have 6. So for this one, the lowest common denominator would be 6. Okay. Or the lowest common denominator, another way to look at that would be 3 times 2. So this step, when you find out what the lowest common denominator is, that's this. We could also state any values that make the expression undefined. Well, I don't have any x's in the denominator, so nothing makes those undefined. The next step, we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by any missing factors. You've already learned how to add or subtract something like this. So we know that if this is the LCD, 3 times 2, for my first fraction, I'm missing a 2. So I'd have to multiply by 2 over 2. My second fraction, I'm missing a 3. So I'd have to multiply by 3 over 3. And now I can do that. I can evaluate. 2 times 2 is going to be 4 over 6 minus 3 over 6. When the denominators are the same, they will stay the same in your answer. And I just combine like terms in the numerator. 4 minus 3 is 1. So my answer is 1/6. For my second example, I look and I find the LCD. What's the lowest common denominator? Well, they both have a 3. That's good. But this fraction is missing an x plus 2. My lowest common denominator is 3 times x plus 2. Well, my second fraction has that, so I leave it alone. My first fraction, it's missing the x plus 2, so I have to multiply the numerator and denominator by x plus 2. And when I do that, oh, I can also identify any restricted values. So I know that I am going to put those together, and when I do, my denominator will be 3 times x plus 2, and my restricted values, x cannot be equal to -2. As I go through and I rewrite this, I have to make sure that I distribute right here. So for my first fraction, I get 2x plus 4. And then from my second fraction, I have plus 12. At this point, I can combine like terms. So it looks like I have plus 4 and plus 12. Those are like terms. I can put them together. So I end up with 2x plus 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all over 3 times x plus 2. My last step is to make sure that I factor the numerator. In this case, I can't actually factor. There's a GCF. I can divide them both by 2. So if I pull out a 2, I'm left with x plus 8. And then 3x plus 2. And I can't reduce anything. There's no factors in the numerator and denominator that match up. So this is my answer. This is my answer along with the restricted values. On to the back. It's the same steps over and over again. I have to check to make sure everything's factored. This is not factored. This is difference of perfect squares, so I have to rewrite it. This one I have to factor first. And then I can find the LCD. So I have 3x over difference of perfect squares, x plus 2, x minus 2, plus 2 over, I'm going to put parentheses around this, x minus 2. So I look for my LCD, my lowest common denominator. Well, they both have an x minus 2, but this one also has an x plus 2. This is my lowest common denominator. It's x plus 2 and x minus 2. So my next step is to multiply any factors that are missing. So this one is missing the x plus 2 part. So I'm going to multiply by x plus 2 over x plus 2. When I do that, I can combine them now as long as the denominators are the same. I'm going to put them together and the denominators will stay the same. X plus 2 and x minus 2. For the first fraction, nothing changes with that because I'm not multiplying by anything, so I get a 3x. But I'm going to add 2 times x plus 2, so I have to make sure that I distribute as I rewrite it. So plus 2x plus 4. From here, I can identify any restricted values. X cannot be equal to -2 and +2. And I can combine like terms. I can put together 3x and 2x. I can put those together. 3 plus 2 is 5. So 5x plus 4 all over x plus 2 and x minus 2. I can't factor the top. There's no common factor. So I boxed my answer. Beautiful. Moving on to the next problem. These are almost identical. The only difference is one is add and one is subtract. So I'm also going to have to factor that denominator. And it's a difference of perfect squares. So I have 3x over, and once it's factored, x squared minus 4 is x plus 2, x minus 2. And then I didn't do anything with the second fraction. I'm going to put parentheses, parentheses around this one. And then I look at my LCD, my lowest common denominator. Is x plus 2 and x minus 2. So every denominator has to have both factors. This one's good. This one's not. This one has the x minus 2, so I have to multiply by x plus 2 over x plus 2. And once I have common denominators, I can put them together. And when I put them together, the denominator doesn't change. So it's going to be x plus 2 and x minus 2. In the numerator, I'm going to have 3x. It just is along for the ride. Nothing changes. But over here, I'm going to have to make sure that I distribute in not just 2, but negative 2. So it's negative 2 times x and negative 2 times 2. So this has to make sure you distribute that negative. So I get minus 2x and minus 4. So now when I combine like terms in the numerator, it's going to be a little different because it's 3 minus 2. So it just makes 1x minus 4. And the denominator stays the same. And I can identify my restricted values because I can't factor this numerator either. X cannot be equal to negative 2 or positive 2 again. We have 2 more examples. I can't do this one until I factored. I have to factor that denominator. And it looks like it's identical over here again. I have to make sure I factor. So nothing changes with my first fraction. It stays the same. And I'm going to put parentheses around this. I'm also going to put parentheses around this one. Oh, actually, that one doesn't need parentheses. So when I go to factor the denominator, I have to think of things that can multiply to make 2, but put together to make 3. So 2 and 1 can work. 1 and 2. And so the middle term is negative, so the 2 has to be negative because it's bigger. And if I have negative 2, I would have to subtract 1 to make negative 3. And a negative times a negative makes a positive. My lowest common denominator is going to be x minus 1, x minus 2. And so I can see here that this one is missing an x minus 2. So I have to multiply by x minus 2 over x minus 2. So I'm going to multiply or distribute the top. As I combine these, I'm going to add. And when the denominators are the same, they stay the same. In the numerator, I have x times x is x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x plus 2x minus 1 plus 2x minus 1. I have to combine like terms. I have minus 2 and plus 2, so those terms are actually going to cancel out. So I can rewrite it. I have x squared minus 1, oops, all over x minus 1 and x minus 2. Last step, I got to check and see if I can factor the numerator. In this case, I actually can because this is a difference of perfect squares. So this becomes x plus 1, x minus 1. All divided by x minus 1. And put parentheses. And then x minus 2. I'm going to double check to see if I have any common factors, and I do. X minus 1, x minus 1. So those can reduce. I am left with x plus 1 over x minus 2. I forgot to identify my restricted values. My restricted values come from your LCD. So x cannot be equal to 1 or 2. It doesn't matter if you cancel out one of the factors, it's still part of your restricted values. It actually creates a hole. I'm removing it, so it creates a hole. My next problem is going to be pretty much the same. The only difference is I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to set it up the same. I'm going to rewrite. And I have to factor that denominator. Again, it's things that can multiply to make 2, but add or subtract to make negative 3. I can use 1 and 2. The middle term is negative, so the bigger number has to be negative. And if I have negative 2, I would have to subtract 1 to make negative 3. My LCD is going to be x minus 1 times x minus 2. So this one is missing the x minus 2. So I have to multiply by x minus 2 over x minus 2. Another thing, I have to make sure that I subtract all of this stuff. So I'm going to have to distribute in a negative to both of those. So I'm also going to have to distribute here. So I get x times x is x squared minus 2x all over, when the denominators are the same, the denominator stays the same. Minus 2x minus negative 1, so that becomes positive 1. At this point, I have minus 2 and minus 2, so that makes minus 4. For this one, is there anything that can multiply to make 1, but put together? Oh, I missed an x. Put together to make negative 4? No, so that numerator does not factor. I'm not going to go any further with this, but I do have to identify my restricted values. X cannot be equal to 1 or 2. That is it. Please do your homework.